Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. It would be helpful if you see empty seats next to you. If everyone could squeeze into the middle, please. That would be very helpful because there's a couple of people still looking for seats. So if you see a seat that is empty, if you can, then next to you, if you could go into the empty seats towards the middle, so that it's easier for people to find an empty seat. And then we're gonna start in a couple of minutes. So good evening, good afternoon, and a warm welcome to the Thomas H. Quinn Lecture Series. I'm Martin Kremers. I serve as Dean of the Mendoza College of Business. So great to see all of you here, and wonderful that it's such a busy Jordan Auditorium here. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to especially thank the members of the Mendoza's Business Advisory Council for their presence here today. I'm especially also pleased to recognize the Quinn family, including Diane Quinn, the wife of Tom Quinn, for whom this series is named. Thank you. Special welcome to all of you. So earlier this fall, in a message to campus, our new Notre Dame president, Father Bob Dowd, called for Notre Dame to be, and I quote, a model of vigorous but respectful dialogue for a society greatly in need. The Quinn Lecture is just such an example of a place for respectful dialogue about topics of great importance to business and society. Since the founding of the lecture series in 2017, the series has hosted remarkable speakers who have a unique view of events on the world stage. Today's speaker is no exception. We're very honored to welcome Gerry Baker, editor-at-large at the Wall Street Journal, one of my favorite publications as a finance guy, I might add. But before Gerry comes to speak, there's another aspect of the Quinn Lecture that you should know about. The Quinn Lecture is also a story of a remarkable friendship. So I now invite Notre Dame alumnus and trustee Jay Jordan, who sponsors the Quinn Lecture Series, to tell us about his college roommate, friend, and business partner, Tom Quinn.
Thank you, Dean. Now, wow, this is a huge crowd. This is the largest crowd we've ever had. And this is what? We started in 17. Whoa. So thank you all for coming. And I'm really here to let those that are our first time attendees know what the genesis was for this whole Quinn Lecture Series. Now, the boss, the dean, told me I had a minute and a half. I've never abide by any rule at Notre Dame. So even though I'm a trustee, I break the rules all the time. we go back to 1965, where I came to Notre Dame and met Thomas Herman Quinn. And we actually met in the freshman football locker room in September of 1965. Now, we were teammates at the time for a year and a half. I moved to rugby because I was a nobody and Tom was a great player. But we became roommates our sophomore year. We remained roommates for sophomore, junior, and senior year, and great friends, obviously. We even joined the Army together. We joined the Army Reserves in Kansas, the Special Forces Reserves, which was kind of interesting, but it was a time where the draft was, pretty aggressive. After our Army experience, we went separate ways. Tom ended up going to Cornell to be a professor of international economics, which I never understood. And I told him all the time, "What are you doing?" He saw the light and eventually got into the medical profession, and he was with American Hospital Supply, and ultimately Baxter Travenol. I went in the entrepreneurial direction, went to Wall Street, spent 9 years on Wall Street. Then in 1982, became founder of the Jordan Company, which is in the private equity business. In 1988, I formed a new company called Jordan Industries in Chicago. And I had a discussion with Tom. I said, "Tom, why don't you come run this thing? Because I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and you're very experienced at this." So he was just about, a week away from being offered the job of presidency of Baxter Travenol, which is a big damn job. Any of you know anything about Baxter Travenol? But I was able to convince him with money and equity and all the good stuff to join us. Shortly thereafter, he ran the whole operation. I just watched. I got him to join us at the Jordan Company as a senior partner. So we've been partners for 1988 till the mid 2000s, 2015, 16, and great friends. We've kind of joined at the hip. And when the tragic event of Tom's passing, which I believe was, Diane, how many years ago was that? Huh? 8 years ago, yeah. Tom was a Business Advisory Council member, Notre Dame, a benefactor, his family. His wife, Diane, is here, and her sister, Pam. He became chairman of the Business Advisory Council as well and did a great job. So when he passed away, I was trying to think about how I could honor him, both as a great friend, as a business partner, but also as a Notre Dame, a very important Notre Dame benefactor and chairman of the advisory council. So I talked to Lou Nanny, and we came up with this idea of a Quinn Lecture Series, Thomas H. Quinn Lecture Series. And I said, "That's a great idea. We will have it every year at the Business Advisory Council weekend, and I will endow it forever. So you're stuck with this forever." And that's what we did. And it couldn't have been better. We're delighted to welcome Gerry Baker, who's a great guy. And actually, Gerry and I met at a dinner party a few years ago. I didn't know that, but he reminded me. I guess I hope I behaved, because I generally don't. Anyway, so that's the story. And Tom and I were just dear friends and business partners and everything else. And I was fortunate enough to have him in my life for many, many years. So that's what this is all about. So thank you.
Thank you, Jay. So now to the subject of today's talk, unpacking the election. Where do we go from here? As the current editor-at-large and former editor-in-chief at the Wall Street Journal, Gerry Baker has had a front-row seat to American politics. Gerry's career in journalism stretches for more than 30 years and includes writing and broadcasting for some of the world's most famous news organizations, such as the Financial Times, the Times of London, and the BBC. His weekly column for the editorial page, called Free Expression, appears in the Wall Street Journal each Tuesday. He is the host of a weekly news and current affairs interview show on the Fox Business Network called The Wall Street Journal at Large with Gerry Baker, and a weekly Wall Street Journal opinion podcast based on his Free Expression column, where he speaks with some of the world's leading writers, influencers, and thinkers. We are very grateful to have Gerry with us on campus today. I would also like to welcome members of the Baker family. They are no strangers to Notre Dame, as 3 of Gerry's 5 daughters are Notre Dame alumni, and his youngest daughter is a current student, a sophomore. I would also want to welcome Matthew Hall, the David A. Potenziani Memorial College Professor of Constitutional Studies and the Director of the Notre Dame Rooney Center for the Study of American Democracy. Matthew will serve as the moderator. Matt specializes in interdisciplinary research that spans the field of American politics, law and society, and organizational behavior. His current research examines popular support for democratic norms in the United States, political psychology, and the role of politics in the workplace. The format for today's discussion is a fireside chat. Matt will ask questions of Gerry during the first part of the talk, and then they will open it up to take questions from all of you, our audience. So welcome, Gerry and Matt.
Now's where we figure out if we're smart enough to turn on our microphones.
You are, certainly.
All right. We've made it. Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, Gerry, for being here. It's my 3rd or 4th time having the privilege to sit down and talk with you, and it's always exciting. Of course, not much is going on in American politics, so we'll see if we can come up with something to talk about. I'll start with the most obvious question, and that is, a few days ago, an election that was widely expected to be a razor-thin toss-up, widely expected to be an election that we might be counting votes and uncertain of the outcome for days or weeks, turned out to be a resounding victory for Donald Trump and the Republicans. Why were Trump and the Republicans so successful? What were the critical factors that led to this outcome?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you very much indeed to all of you for being here. I want to say a big thank you to Notre Dame. It's always a pleasure to come back to campus. As you heard, I have 5 daughters, and 4 of them have attended Notre Dame. We still haven't quite figured out where we went wrong with the other one, but she seems to be doing okay, but somehow I don't know how. My youngest daughter, as you heard, Scarlett, is here. She's a sophomore. She's here today, and I'm very proud to be with her too. I'm particularly proud and honoured to be taking part in this in the Quinn lecture. As Jay said, we have met before, but it's a privilege for me to be able to help you honour your friend in this way, and that his widow is here too. And it's I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So thank you. Well, the first thing to say, Matt, is, as you said, is, we were told this was going to be a knife-edge election. It was going to be razor sharp. We might have recounts and legal challenges and litigation for days, maybe even weeks afterwards, and we don't. So once again, you have the media to thank for getting it exactly right. Because that was obviously the message that the media gave. Look, I think we're going to talk about the polls, and I think in a bit, and what maybe went wrong with the polls. But in terms of the election itself, look, I think it will rank as one of the more significant elections that we've had in this country. And when I say we, by the way, you may hear from my accent that I'm not originally from these parts. I grew up in England and went to university in England, but I've lived in this country for 30 years, and I'm very proud to say I became a US citizen last year, so this was my first opportunity to vote. I do think it will rank as one of the most important elections. Just look, first of all, just going through the basic data. Donald Trump won the election. He won the popular vote. They're still counting in California, as we know. They'll be counting for weeks in California. Any of you are in California here, I'm sorry about what on earth, why it takes you 6 weeks to count votes in California. I'll never understand, but they'll still be counting there for a while. But it does look very likely that he's won the popular vote, as well as obviously a solid majority in the Electoral College. That makes him the first Republican to win the popular vote since George W. Bush in 2004, and therefore only the second Republican to win the popular vote in an election in the last 9 elections now, including this one. And I think what's particularly significant is whereas Bush won in 2004 as the incumbent president, obviously Trump was running from the outside. Now it's complicated, obviously, because he'd been president before, first president, as we know, since Grover Cleveland to win 2 non-consecutive terms of office. But that means the real significance of that, Matt, is that not only is he the first Republican since 2004 to win the majority of the popular vote, and it will be a majority too. He's the first president, therefore, since Ronald Reagan in 1980, as the first Republican since Ronald Reagan to win the presidency from outside the presidency, to challenge a Democrat, to beat a Democrat for the presidency. And I do think with the popular vote. And I do think there's I think there's a pretty good chance that this election will be seen as significant as that election in 1980. We're going to talk a little bit about, what may happen and what Trump may do in office. But I think if you just think about it in terms of its political significance, Trump won by advancing the Republican vote across the country. A remarkable statistic. His vote share went up from 2020 in 49 states out of 50 and the District of Columbia. That's first president to have done that in 50 years. But as has been very widely remarked upon, perhaps most striking of all, and I think this is where the significance lies and where people might see parallels with Ronald Reagan, he advanced the Republican vote in demographics, not just geographies, but in demographics, where the Republicans have not been traditionally very strong. He won 46% of the Hispanic vote, it seems, a majority of Hispanic men. That's the largest share of the vote that's ever been recorded, according to exit polls for a Republican. He won 21% of black men. That's the highest share of the vote for at least among black men for at least 40 years for a Republican. He won places he won a young vote. He performed very strongly among young voters.
And even women, where he had been
he advanced among women. That's right, yes. And won white women. And again, some of those geographies. Again, some remarkable statistics. He won. There's this county on the Mexican border in Texas called Starr County, which is overwhelmingly Hispanic, which no Republican has ever won since 1892. He won that state. He won a county in Georgia called Baldwin County, which is 42% black. No Republican has ever won that state. So again, it's not just the facts that he won. He won by winning the popular vote, and he won a solid majority. By the way, we could also say against all of the odds and all of the kind of the unceasing campaigns against him, which we can also talk about. He won. Not only did he win that clear victory, he has reshaped the political geography and the political demographics of this country. We are in the process of a major political realignment here, where the Republican Party is becoming an increasingly multi-ethnic party, particularly strong among working class voters, among the non-college educated, who I think for all kinds of reasons feel that they've been left behind in the last 10 years or so. So I think, everybody's watched the returns as they came in. We were all somewhat taken aback that the election wasn't as close as most of us thought it was going to be. But I do think as we digest the results, we will come to see this as an historically important election.
And so what made him win so big? Right, this is a remarkable victory. How do we explain that? What was it? A strength of his? Was it a weakness of Harris? Was it underlying factors in our society? What was it that? Why that outcome?
So, the famous line, victory has 1,000 fathers and defeat is an orphan. I think I'll come to the defeat parts because I think the orphan of defeat is more interesting in a way than the paternity of victory, shall we say. But let's look at the factors that I think clearly contributed to his victory. Obviously, first and foremost, the economy. Now, this is interesting. And again, I know we'll talk a bit more about this. lot of people, especially in the media, look at the economy. The US economy has been growing relatively strongly, certainly relative to the rest of the world. It's just recorded growth this year, probably 2.5%, 2.5% last year. That's pretty good by recent standards. Unemployment is historically low, back around about 4%. The stock market, as we know, financial markets have been pretty strong. And so people look at it and say, well, what's wrong with the economy? Why don't? But the answer obviously is inflation and the fact that prices went up in the first 2 years, particularly strongly. Prices today are 20% higher than they were when Joe Biden took office. Wages have barely caught up. Wages actually lagged inflation for the first 3 years of that administration. They finally just about caught up. But in historic terms,
and real disposable income has almost caught up because of that.
Just about caught up. But again, under Trump's term, between 2017 and 2020, before the pandemic, real wages rose very sharply. So people feel, and remember, this inflation comes after 20 years when we've had essentially no inflation in this country. People have got used to prices not rising in the shop. I'm of an age that I remember very well rampant inflation in the 1970s when we got used to 15, 20% rates of inflation. For the last 20 years, most people in this country have never seen inflation like that. So to see this increase in prices, it's very, very unsettling. They compare it unfavorably with what they saw under Trump. And I think that's the main factor. Second big factor, of course, according to all the exit polls and according to just our own understanding and knowledge from people we talk to, is immigration and the sense that illegal immigration into this country is out of control. And whatever the number is, the government officially admits to 7, 8 million. It could be 12, 14, 15 million people have come across the border unauthorized, without documentation in the last 4 years. That's incredibly disruptive and incredibly disorienting, I think, for people. They see, first of all, it does put pressure on some communities. It puts pressure on the health care systems and education systems. It arguably contributes to lower wages. We can argue about that, but there is some evidence for that. But more importantly, I think it just contributes to a general sense that the country's out of control. That, if you have people who can just walk into the country and not face any consequences for it, I think people feel that it's very unsettling.
So how much of that is in my own community? I see the disruption. I see social service strained beyond their capacity. I see jobs going to immigrants. Versus how much of that is a narrative built up in the media, particularly right-wing media, that some people would call, well, don't you want the warning before it gets to your community? Other people would call fear-mongering and exaggerating. How much of it is they're seeing it in their real lives versus they're seeing it on TV?
Well, Matt, they're eating the dogs. If I may say so. Obviously that was an exaggeration, shall we say, to say the least. But I think it is a real thing. I think people do see it. And look, we know there are some benefits from massive immigration. There's certainly benefits from massive legal immigration. There are arguably some benefits for the economy. One of the reasons some economists think the economy has been strong in the last few years is because there's been this very big supply of labor coming in that's been able to keep the US economy growing at the rate that it has. But I do also think people see it, and again, the larger point is people see this as this just is wrong. People, I speak as an immigrant to this country, to become an immigrant to this country, and I'm a proud immigrant here. It's an incredibly long, bureaucratic, tortuous process, expensive process. And a lot of people, and I think this is one of the main reasons Trump does well among Hispanic voters, a lot of people, Hispanic voters, go through the process. It takes them a lot of time. It's stressful. It's bureaucratic. And they resent the idea that some people can just come in and not have to go through any of that process and can somehow be normalized and legalized afterwards. So, look, I think immigration has been a big factor. And what I was going to say, just very briefly, but on the kind of the orphan, the orphan of defeat, as it were, I think this is really important too. I think that first of all, there are other factors too. The Democrats, first of all, told us for 3 years Joe Biden was fine and completely, mentally capable. And then we all saw the debate on June the 27th, and they all quickly scrambled, to change him. And they brought in a candidate who, for whatever her qualities, and she had certain qualities, was very untested, ran in 2019, didn't win a single primary vote in 2019. So the Democrats clearly helped contribute to this. But the orphan of defeat point is that the Democrats' defeat, I do think this was a repudiation of so much of what the Democrats have done not just in the last 4 years, but more broadly what the Democratic Party has stood for. And the fact that for ordinary voters, it goes back to my point about Trump doing very, very well among working class voters, among the non-college educated voters, this sense that the Democratic Party has abandoned them. doesn't care about them. Whether it's things like illegal immigration and the fact that they seem to care more about illegal immigrants than they do about American workers, whether it is some of these, very sort of hot button issues like the issues of transgender people. And again, we can be very sensitive about this, but I think the sense that, when Donald Trump ran that ad in the campaign, pointing out that Kamala Harris had supported public funding to allow male prisoners, to change sex, I think that people thought, why are we allowing public funding for things like that when so many Americans are struggling? Why, do we have this, we go through this long process where Democrats were, in favor of defunding the police and bail reform, when many people are living in communities where crime has been very serious and has been a real challenge? So I think the bigger story here, and it's the reason behind this realignment that I talked about, is the Democrats have lost touch with their traditional voters. They've become the party of the elites who, rightly or wrongly, many voters in the country think they just don't stand for us. And Donald Trump's out there, and they do think whatever you think of him, and we can talk about some of his many flaws, people think that actually he represents them better than the Democrats do.
So I want to do quick follow-ups on all three of those, on immigration, the economy, and the sort of democratic excess, I'll call liberal excess, I'll call it. On the immigration, if Joe Biden were in the room, I can't help but think he'd be, I would say jumping up and down screaming, but let's say waving his hand, trying to get attention and say, hey, you know what we should do to fix immigration? I've got a wild idea. Let's pass a bill, a big bipartisan bill. Let's make it very conservative with huge border protections, huge resources for border protection, resolve the issue of illegals in the country, create exactly the bill they were drafting in the Senate, exactly the bill that Donald Trump killed. This is a remarkable achievement, I think, in American politics, to win on an issue that both sides were ready to come together and solve 6 months ago, and yet Trump killed that and was still able to win on that issue.
Because I think nobody bought it, Matt, really. I mean, when you have an administration that for 3 years has had...
It was too little too late.
Yeah, I mean, nobody bought it. Then they suddenly, they came in the first day in office. Joe Biden came in 2021. He undid all of the restrictions that Donald Trump had imposed to limit illegal immigration, and more or less sent the signal to the world, come on in.
Yeah.
The water's lovely. Come and join us. He did that, and surprise, surprise, 11 million people, let's say, came into the country as a result. When they realized what a political liability this was, that people were actually saying this shouldn't happen. Joe Biden then proposed this legislation, and then Donald Trump blocked it. I mean, we can argue, but it was proposed by Senator Langford and some other conservative Republican senators, bipartisan. But there are a lot of people. First of all, I don't think it would have passed the House, and secondly, it did have some. It did allow some degree of amnesty for people.
Sure. Yes. Absolutely.
So I don't think it was.
But maybe the same bill 2 years earlier.
Possibly
Could have done a very different. They just waited too long to convince.
And because I think it just looked cynical. People just thought this is an attempt to deal with the political consequences of a bad policy rather than to fix the policy.
About the economy, obviously this was a huge factor, right? I've seen interview after interview of swing voters saying, at the end of the day, I had more money under Donald Trump than I had under Joe Biden. And that's a really common narrative in American politics, that the economy fares better under Republicans, that the Republicans are the party of economic growth. But according to many metrics, that simply isn't true. Comparing Republican and Democratic presidencies over the last half century, GDP, unemployment, job growth only counting in the private sector, income growth for those in the bottom of 20%, all better when a Democrat happens to sit in the Oval Office. Now, I'm the first to say I don't think whoever's sitting in the Oval Office has that much influence over the economy either way, but if you're going to get the credit, you should get the blame. If you're going to get the blame, you should get the credit. Why do you think that narrative is so strong in American politics, that those numbers aren't going to matter? That narrative persists.
Well, so I think it's a good point. And look, I was at the Democratic Convention earlier this year, and Bill Clinton, I think it was, or Barack Obama made a speech where this is supported by Bureau of Labor Statistics evidence, that in the last 50 years, since 1988, so almost 40 years, there have been 50 million net new jobs created in the United States. 49 million of them have occurred under Democratic presidents, as it happens. Now, There are a number of reasons for that. First of all, I agree with you completely. A president has relatively limited effect on economic activity during his or her term. They can have some, a big tax cut or a big public spending boost can certainly do that. I think probably both Biden and Trump probably did have some impact. But I think fiscal policy particularly is better directed to kind of long-term improvements in the economy. And that leads me to the second point which is that some of the changes that are made under one president don't actually become realized in economic benefit terms until the subsequent president. The economic reforms that Ronald Reagan made in the 1980s, did have, initially he took over obviously in 1981 when the economy was in the midst of a very deep recession, and we had a recession again for the next, we had a rocky time those first couple of years. Growth really started to pick up in the latter part of that term and then continued. We had a brief recession in the 1990s, but many of those benefits, tax cuts that he'd introduced, reining in some union power, some of the trade measures that he introduced, I think had long-term benefits that probably
a lot of policies have lagged.
Bill Clinton benefited from. And then the other factor is,
but then wouldn't the lagged effects go the other way? Wouldn't if inflation is bad under Biden, well, can't he blame that on Trump? As well, there's lagged effects.
It's true. Look, but again, I think we're talking about the difference between sort of, if you like, economic reality and perception.
Yes.
And there's no question that Ronald Reagan famously asked the question in 1980, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? I wouldn't put all of the blame for the problems that the US had between 1976 and 1980 on Jimmy Carter. He's responsible for some of them, but some of them go back to Richard Nixon and price controls and various other things like that. So, but there's no question in the voters' mind. They look where they are today, and understandably, they think, am I better off than I was 4 years ago? And when it comes to prices, man, that's the key thing with this administration. They don't feel better off, and it's not a mirage. It's not a kind of a myth or a media sort of falsehood. It's true. They just don't feel better off. So look, I think, and then the other thing I was going to say is that to some extent, some of those periods of strong economic performance under Democratic presidents have also come with bipartisan activity with the Republican Congress.
Yes.
Some of the most important, I think, economic reforms were implemented in the 1990s when after
6 years of Clinton's presidency as a Republican.
After 94, particularly when Clinton had a Republican majority, there was some significant reforms made there. So it's I think to extrapolate, although people do, I think it's absolutely fair to say that voters do look at who's president and look at how their economic performance is. I think it's more complex, and the lags have an effect. And I think the immediate impact of a president on the economic performance is relatively limited.
But they're still going to get the credit or the blame.
Yeah.
And then as far as Democratic excess, do you think that this again is? I think sometimes the conversation of the left and right is talking past each other. That when you ask, should taxpayers foot the bill for gender change operations for convicted criminals, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you'd be hard pressed to get 5% of Democrats agreeing to that. It's shocking.
Unfortunately, they all sit in Congress under the leadership of the Democrats.
Right, yes. I mean, it is remarkable that the leadership on this just doesn't match the popular voters. At the same time, if I asked, should the U.S. taxpayers foot the bill for any medical care for convicted criminals, I don't know what percentage we would get, right? I think sometimes responses to polls aren't necessarily the response that we would get if we sat down and thought about things in more depth. But I think that, so on the one hand, it definitely seems like at least a lot of the rhetoric, from defunding the police to some of the taxpayer-funded sex change operations, whatever it is clearly showing an extremist Democratic policy. On the other hand, we have, I don't know if you've noticed, Donald Trump has said a few things that maybe could be called extremist.
I think very hard.
Yeah, chew on that for a while. Let's see if we can think. I won't repeat the language here, and I won't try to do the litany.
Yeah.
But for those of you who aren't aware that Donald Trump has said anything extremist, you can go look that up. Why concern about Democratic extremism and not concern about Republican extremism? That's my basic question.
It's a good question, and no question Donald Trump says some extraordinary and disturbing things, some of them even true. But I think, But I think the difference is how it's on the core issues. People see Trump in this election, at least. I'm not making larger claims about Trump or the Republican Party, but in this election, at least, people thought on the issues that really matter to them, the issues on where the country is headed, that set aside the crazy stuff Trump says about eating the dogs, or he's going to set the military on,
he's going to lock up his enemies, he's going to deport people,
wherever that's coming from in his head, or Liz Cheney should go and go to war against and face the gun barrels. I think people do understand that the core issues that matter to them, and it is the economy, and it is immigration, and it is, I think, broadly this sense of the leadership of the party, not just of the Democratic Party, Matt, but I think it's the fact that these, for want of a better word, woke progressive ideas about there is no such thing as a woman. You have Democratic, you had the current Supreme Court, the Joe Biden's Supreme Court nominee, in her hearings, asked at her Judiciary Committee hearing, whether she could define a woman. She said, "No, I can't." So I think people see that. They see the immigration issue. They see this whole plethora of woke issues, whether it is some of the extremist stuff on Black Lives Matter and defunding the police, the extremist stuff about American history and America's, the essential. So somehow the essential wickedness of America, which is what the Democratic. But there was a very interesting poll, one of the more interesting polls I saw on Election Day. Asked people, do you think a number of questions, very basic questions about America? Do you think America is good or bad, good or evil? And Democratic voters, especially college educated and and postgraduate college educated voters, overwhelming majorities thought America was basically a bad country. Overwhelming majorities of people who were Republicans thought America was a good country. That whole narrative that we have experienced in the last 5-6 years of a country that which is upending all of the values that I think most Americans have long held to be just core, fundamental, self-evident truths, dare I even say, that the way in which the left has overturned those, whether it's about gender, whether it's about race, whether it's about American history, whether it's about the global integration and globalism and the role of America in the world, I think those do matter more to people than some of the wild, crazy things that Donald Trump says.
Well, wait, I thought I was going to agree with you for a second, but then I think we went in different directions, because I totally understand if I'm a swing voter and I hear Donald Trump say, fill in the blank, they're eating the dogs. I'll use that as our catch-all for all of the stuff he says that a lot of us would wish he wouldn't say. But I think, but I don't care about that, because I care about, can I pay for groceries? That's what I care about. That's what I'm going to vote on. That makes sense to me. That voters are willing to dismiss the extremist rhetoric because they don't take it seriously. It's a show. It's all pretend. I'm voting on the issues that I think are practical. But then when we turn around and look at the Democrats, I can't imagine that they think it's practical whether or not a trans person can compete in a swimming competition at a university I've never heard of. Is that affecting whether or not I can buy groceries? Is that affecting, to me, I wonder if we don't put too much emphasis on the symbolic extremism of the left as a driving force versus just, I think inflation is going to be high. And so I'm wondering, fundamentally, is this a question of, do voters vote on the symbolic extremist issues versus the kitchen table, basic economics, immigration? Or do voters treat extremism differently? For some reason, I don't care about eating the dogs. I do care about paying for sex change operations in prisons. Has this ever happened once? Could we have one case? But maybe they treat the extremism differently.
A very good reporter wrote when Trump first ran for president that the difference between Trump's supporters and the media in particular is that Trump supporters take Trump seriously but not literally. And the media take Trump literally but not seriously. And I think that was really the most insightful thing that's ever been said. He says wild numbers of things. And look, we know the other thing about Trump is he was in office. He was president for 4 years. despite, and we can talk about what happened after the election on January the 6th, which I thought was appalling and absolutely indefensible, and I would never, ever, ever attempt to defend it. But for most folk, until that election, the 4 years of his presidency, it was obviously disrupted by COVID at the end. But he didn't do any of this stuff. He didn't do any of. He didn't lock up Hillary Clinton as he kept saying he would do in 2016.
He didn't even really build a wall over the entire Mexico
and he certainly didn't get the Mexicans to pay for it. So I think, but I think the message. The deeper message that people see is an important one. And back to this point, I take your point. Yeah, does it really matter? Are people actually personally affected? Some people are. Some people are affected when their daughter is competing against a transgender
what could
athlete.
the percentage
But it's
of that
tiny. I'm not
be?
disputing that. It's a small number. But it's what it says about what the Democratic Party stands for and whose side.
And voters do take them literally.
Yeah, that's true. And who the Democratic Party seems to represent and whose side it seems to be on. And look, I have many, many reservations about Trump, but I do think the Democratic Party, and by the way, you're hearing it not just from people like me who are not sympathetic to the Democratic Party, but you're hearing it from Democrats. Bernie Sanders said the day after the election, this is what you get. If you abandon the working class will abandon you. And the white working class abandoned the Democrats some time ago. Now the black and brown working classes are abandoning the Democrats. You had someone like, Seth Moulton, who's a very thoughtful congressman from Massachusetts, a Democratic congressman, say, I can totally understand people don't like the idea. I've got two daughters. I don't like the idea of my daughters having to compete against men in sports. There are more and more Democrats, I think, who are starting to say, we have to change, and we can't be the party that just looks like it's not on the side of ordinary people, but instead campaigns on these issues, these kind of niche issues that make people think, frankly, it's just out of the mainstream of America.
Well, let's zoom out a little bit. So let's try to put this in a little historical context. There's just no way around it. This is a historic election in a few ways. Obviously, it's the first time a president has been reelected after leaving the White House since Grover Cleveland over a century. It's the first time that a convicted felon has been elected U.S. president. And it's now the second time that a major party has nominated a woman who has lost, both times to Donald Trump, who has been accused of various gender-related things. When we try to zoom out in this kind of broader context, not what's driving voters today, but what does this tell us about the bigger story of America and where we're going?
Okay, well, on the Grover Cleveland point, I'm going to leave Grover Cleveland to the historians in the room, because I wasn't around at the time. I'm old, but I'm not that old. But yeah, obviously it's fascinating. Look, take the other points. On the convicted felon point, again, I'm always uncomfortable in a position of defending Trump over many of the things he's said and done, because I don't support them. But the convicted felon thing is a real problem. And if anything, I think it helps Trump rather than the Democrats.
Definitely.
Because that particular case, on which you could argue about all the four cases that he faced, that they all were flawed in important ways, that particular case, the Manhattan district attorney prosecuting him over what in any other circumstance, first of all, would almost never be prosecuted. And if it were prosecuted, it's always prosecuted as a misdemeanor, not a felony. And he somehow, through kind of a sort of legal alchemy, turned it into a felony with some, without, by the way, even laying out the case to the jury as he did it. Look, and I've heard Democrats in New York say this too, by the way, again, so this is not a partisan point. That case was politically motivated from the start right through to the finish. He was helped by a very favorable judge too, and a jury in Manhattan. Manhattan voted in slightly greater numbers for Trump this time, but in 2020, 9% of people in Manhattan voted for Donald Trump. So, he had a very unfavorable forum, and he had a case against him that was flimsy at best. And I think, by the way, it's very likely. I mean, we'll see what happens.
And even regardless of the legal strength, hard to explain to the public.
Exactly. Yeah. Very much. So it gave the Democrats the opportunity to say, we're running against a convicted felon, and just as you say, a convicted felon has never been elected president before. I just don't think that. I think people saw that and thought that was, and again, whatever you think of Trump, that was politically motivated prosecution. It was using the judicial system to go after a political opponent in a way that I think is just, and by the way, not only was it wrong on its own merits, it then also helped undermine some of the Democrats' arguments against Trump, because the Trump again, when Trump says things like, I'm going to, go after, I'm going to use the Justice Department.
It's very easy to say,
It's very easy to say, well, hang on, who's conducting the lawfare here? He's been, prosecuted in 4 different jurisdictions for the last 3 years.
So it was undermining some of their democracy
It undermined their own argument, as well as, I think, increasing sympathy for Trump. And then the third point,
Gender.
Look, I think this is really interesting. You're right, second successive woman presidential candidate who's lost. I think, and there is a lot of, talk around, and Democrats are sort of consoling themselves a little bit, if you can call it that, by saying, a lot of people turned up because they wouldn't vote for a woman. We all saw famously Barack Obama during the campaign, going and talking to young black men and saying, I think some of you are not voting for her because you don't like the idea of a woman as president. I don't think that's right, but I do think there is something really interesting about this from an international perspective. So I'm British. Britain elected a woman prime minister in 1979, almost 50 years ago. And since then, it's elected the Conservative Party's elected 2 more women prime ministers really since then. But Britain's had 3 women prime ministers. Interestingly, just last week, slightly overlooked in the election here, Britain's Conservative Party, which of course lost power this year, elected as its leader a black woman. So this is now the 4th leader of the Conservative Party to be a woman. Interestingly, Labour, the governing party, has never had a woman leader. Yeah. If you look at other women leaders in the world, you look at Italy. Italy has a woman prime minister. She's also a conservative, very, very forceful nationalist conservative, Giorgia Meloni. One of the other big global stage leaders that we've had in the world in the last 20 years as a woman was Angela Merkel of Germany, also a conservative. I do think that it's easier I think there is a certain residual among a proportion of the population. I think it probably is true that women do have to clear a higher bar. Women, in many walks of life, they do have to, there's almost a double standard that's applied. They're expected to be tough and strong, and they make all the tough decisions that a president or a prime minister has to make. But they're also expected to be, they have feminine characteristics. They're meant to be, appealing and warm and caring and charming.
They have to be everything simultaneously.
There's things that men don't have to be. And I do think part of the key to resolving that, and I think it is very striking that in Britain, in Italy, in Germany, in Israel, with Golda Meir, you have to be a tough. Really, you have to come across as a very, very tough woman. Margaret Thatcher, when she ran for office in Britain in 1979, didn't make anything of the fact that she was a woman. She just, there's a very crude saying, which I certainly in this context won't say, but there was a joke about Margaret Thatcher when she was prime minister that she was a woman and her cabinet consisted of 22 men and her, and it used to be said that she was the only person in the cabinet who had cojones, shall we say? So there is something that you have to. I do think a woman has to come across as a particularly tough, plausible leader in order to win, and I think it does help if they're conservatives. I think people are more likely to think of conservatives as being able to stand up and do the kind of tough things that they expect a leader to do, and I think Kamala Harris never cleared that bar.
Would you like to predict when's the next time the Democratic Party is going to nominate a woman?
I just wouldn't. I wouldn't rule it out. There are talented women in the Republican Party. I think, if there'd been an open primary this year, it's possible that Gretchen Whitmer might have. I don't think she would have won the nomination. There are talent.
But even after the double loss, you think Democrats will go try this again in the next 10 years?
I think it would be wrong to conclude that the reason Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris lost is because they're women. I don't think that's the reason they lost.
So you don't think? I agree, but do you think that might be enough of a narrative to dissuade their nomination?
It could be, but again, I think if the Democratic Party can find a kind of Margaret Thatcher or a Giorgia Meloni in the next 4 years, have at it. I think they could win.
So we talk a lot about polarization in the U.S. Intense polarization dividing us. And yet there's also another really interesting dynamic that our politics seems to have a sort of equilibrium. Not only are we divided, but we're divided almost right down the middle. For example, in the last, 10 elections since 1988, not one election has been a huge landslide. But in 6 of the 10 elections before 1988, a major party won a landslide in 6 of those 10. And these landslide elections used to be really valuable in providing sort of clear answers from the American people to big questions. Are we going to have a New Deal? Yes. Roosevelt wins landslide and then a bigger landslide. Are we going to have civil rights? Yes. Johnson wins a landslide. Are we going to keep expanding the government forever? No. Reagan wins a landslide and then a bigger landslide. These gave us like clear answers to the questions of the day. We don't get those much more. Why do we have this perpetual equilibrium? And what does it do for us in order to resolve big questions? Even the questions we are able to resolve, like, okay, now we have gay rights. There wasn't a big gay rights election. It was more this kind of cultural drift in the background. So what does this mean for our politics?
I mean, as you know, I've thought a lot about this, and I wrote about it quite a bit in a book that I wrote last year. This kind of stasis of equilibrium, this continuous, as you say, perpetual equilibrium, which is unprecedented now in American history. It's been going on essentially for at least, let's say, at least 24 years. And by the way, this election result, despite what I said at the beginning about it, I do think it's of historic significance, and I think part of the answer may lie in this election result. It's still going to be another of those elections where the winner is going to get 50.5% of the vote and the loser is going to get 49% of the vote. It's going to, as dramatic as a result as it undoubtedly is, we are still a 50-50 country. No one should be in any dispute about that. Look, I think why is it like that? I think part of it, I think it's a self-perpetuating process. That one of the things that happens when you have an election, a decisive election, where one party loses and the other one party wins and the other party loses, is that the party that loses has to completely rethink itself, right? 64, the Republicans after Johnson won. 84, the Democrats when Reagan won his landslide. They have to, 36, when the Republicans when FDR won his landslide. That party has to do some serious reflection, has to look at itself, and has to think, while staying true to its values and its fundamental ideals, find a new approach, find a way of appealing to the voters that didn't vote for them. And that usually means moving somewhat towards the other party. The Republicans ultimately did accept the New Deal. The Republicans, again, in the 60s, ultimately did accept the Great Society and civil rights. The Democrats ultimately did, under Bill Clinton, become the New Democrats and move to accept a lot of the things that Reagan had done. I think one of the reasons we have this continuing equilibrium is that never happens. We have election after election now, which, again, because they're 50-50, is why I say it's a self-reinforcing process. The losing party can say, one, as they often do, I didn't really lose. I was cheated. Both Trump, obviously, famously in 2020, but even Hillary Clinton in 2016. Trump was illegitimate. I won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. He was helped by the Russians and all this kind of stuff. We go back to 2000 and, George Bush and Al Gore. Democrats claim George Bush was installed by a Republican-dominated Supreme Court. So one side or the other doesn't say, we lost, we need to rethink. Mm-hmm. They say, we lost because the other side cheated, or something in the system enabled them to win, and it's unfair. And then the second thing is they think, actually, they're going to get another chance. 2 years' time, there's going to be midterm elections. And by the way, here, we're going to have 2 years' time, we're going to have midterm elections. Republicans are going to be defending a lot of seats in the Senate in 2 years' time. The Democrats could well flip the Senate back in 2 years, depending what happens. But even if they don't, then in 4 years' time, we're going to have another election. It's been close. So I think this cements this sort of polarization in place. Neither side really has to acknowledge that they need to change. They just, they become instead much more inclined to appeal to their core supporters, whether through the primary system or ultimately through the election. And there's no incentive for them to reach back towards the middle. And I think that's an imperfect explanation, but I think it's part of the explanation. And there's a chance here, as close again as this election was, because there's a sense that it was decisive. It's the first time since 2012, when Obama was reelected, that we've had a decisive election where everybody says, you know what, okay, the other side won, or our side won. And there's a chance here, I think, and especially we talked about some of the things that I think has gone wrong with the Democratic Party in the last few years. There's a chance, I think, that the Democratic Party might do what it hasn't done for a long time, and frankly, what the Republican Party didn't do for a long time, which is to really look at itself and say, we've got things wrong, and here's where we need to change. And if you get that, I think when you get a decisive election result, as you got in 36, 64, 84 tend to happen, every 20 or 30 years. Maybe this is another one. Then you get this paralysis breaks. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of breaking, more and more common in our political discourse is a conversation about whether or not our democracy itself is broken. There are complaints about this on both sides of the political aisle, although there's an argument to be made that what we mean when we say democracy maybe isn't the same thing. What we mean when we say it's broken maybe isn't the same thing. But more than any time in my lifetime, people are worried about the state of American democracy. And part of that is driven by the perpetual division, by the increasing animosity, by the sort of low-grade, non-violent civil war, although with increasing assassination attempts and mobs in the Capitol, it's non-violent, has a big asterisk on it. What do you think? Are our politics broken? And what's going to be the path forward? Will this low-grade civil war escalate, as we've seen? Well, you go back to the 1850s, it escalated all the way. Or will it decline? As we've seen periods of intense division in the 1960s, for example, that did recede over time. So which direction do you think we'll go, and how will we break out of it?
So, I hesitate to say it's broken because, the country goes on. It is highly polarized, but even in a highly polarized political environment, you still, whatever one can say about Joe Biden, he got a lot of things done as president. You may not like them. A lot of people don't like them, and that's maybe why they voted for Trump. But legislatively, he got big economic stimulus program through. He got a bipartisan infrastructure plan through, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is a huge state investment in a lot of American industry. He did big things with the border, as we've talked about. He did, not successful things, but had a big impact in foreign policy. So in a sense, it's not. It's not broken in the sense that you can't do anything. You can win an election. I have no doubt that Trump and his Republican-controlled Congress, they've got the Senate, they probably have the House, will do all kinds of things, and there will be stuff will get done. What has gone badly wrong is that in the last 20 years, people have stopped trusting their institutions, their leading institutions. There's some remarkable data on this. People are surveyed every year. Gallup surveys a huge survey of Americans every year. And trust in the major institutions, that is the federal government, the media, academia, judiciary, law enforcement, big business, technology, in public health, especially in the last few years after COVID. The numbers of people saying they have a great deal of confidence in or trust in those institutions has plummeted. The media is the worst example, the best example, worst example. In the 1970s, 80s, 70, 60, 70% of people said they had a great deal or a lot of trust in the media. That number's down to like 20% today. People don't trust these institutions. I think there's a number. So I think that's what's broken. I think what's gone wrong is a number of things. One, frankly, we've had institutional failure on a number of levels. I think, again, we talked about the economy having been relatively strong in the last few years, and that's been good. But if you look at the last 20 years and you look at what things that have happened to this country, three major things: the Iraq War, which was, frankly, and I supported it at the time, was a disaster. It was disastrously conceived and it was disastrously executed, and that meant, I think, that resulted in a tremendous amount of mistrust in the ability of the federal government to make good decisions for the American people. We had the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, which brought the world and the US to its worst economic recession since the 1930s. And there was a sense there that the system had gone badly wrong, and particularly that it had gone badly wrong because of the bailouts. People felt, why is the government bailing out all these people who got us into this worst crisis that we've ever had? That really undermined trust, I think, in government. And then the pandemic, and the fact in particular that lockdowns went on for so long. We had this kind of strange situation where people were told they couldn't, kids didn't get educated. I know, by the way, I want to say, since we're here, what an amazing job Notre Dame did of keeping Notre Dame open in that period when all other schools were closing. But yes, exactly. I'll say that too. but we were the lucky ones. Notre Dame was lucky. As you know, most of the country shot them. The damage done to kids' education from those decisions is just extraordinary. So that, these things really undermine the public's trust in their leaders' ability to make the right decisions for the American people and to get things right for the American people. And I think that part is broken. And then again, the media has frankly disgraced itself in the last 20 years by becoming increasingly partisan, absurdly partisan. If you just want to entertain yourselves for a bit, go and look at the coverage of some of these, news organizations who are sort of trying to, stop them, console themselves after Donald Trump's victory this week, and how extremely partisan, absurdly partisan they become. It's no wonder people don't trust the media. They become just propaganda machines for the most part, with the exception of the Wall Street Journal. I will quickly if you're not a subscriber already, I can help you. I can help you get a subscription afterwards. The media's lost trust. We have, again, glowing exception of Notre Dame. So many of our universities, we've seen what's happened there on campuses. Left-wing sort of faculties, cancel culture, this extraordinary explosion of sort of pro-Hamas demonstrations we've seen in the last year. People have lost trust in those educational institutions. A lot of that is what's, I think, has gone wrong. I think it's that sense that the country is broken, not so much, which of course that reflects itself in election results, and people are angry. They were angry with Donald Trump 4 years ago, and that's why he lost. They're angry with the Democrats this time and Joe Biden this time. But I think that is the broader problem the country faces, that the institutions that lead this kind of big business, as I said before, trust in big business has declined very dramatically over the last 20 years, partly as a result of scandals, partly a sense that businesses controls government. I think there is way too much influence for big business in Washington, the lobbying.
Elon Musk will clean that up.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. Double name, so make things much more efficient. I think that's what's broken. The public sense of confidence in their leadership, in their not just their government leadership, but their private sector leadership, their cultural leadership. And that's going to take a lot to repair. I think, again, we in the media need to do so much work to try and repair that. We need to get a government that is more responsive to people's needs and not to make the kind of terrible mistakes and decisions that have been made over the last 20 years. But it will take a long time. Once you lose trust, you can lose trust in an instant, and it can take years to rebuild it.
Before we close, does anything make you feel optimistic about American politics? I gave him warning on all the other questions, but not this one.
Look, I will say this, and again, having become an American, I'm very proud to be an American last year. I came to this country because I admired it. I admired what it stands for, what it stood for in the world. I'm English. I'm pretty proud of my country too, but, frankly, America's overtaken us, which, I know when I became editor of the Wall Street Journal, I could see people thinking, why have they let a Brit edit the Wall Street Journal? I thought we threw these people out here 250 years ago. But I'm very proud of this country. I came here in large part because I admired what this country stood for, what it stood for in the world. Its system has lifted more people. System of free market capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty in the world than any economic system in the history of mankind. Its political system, the values on which American democracy is based, of freedom, of free expression, of the free representation of the people, was a revolutionary idea back 240 years ago, and it's transformed the world, and it's lifted more people out of repression and misery than any other system. This is the greatest country in the world, and it has succeeded because it's remained true to those values through endless crises. So the answer to your question is, it's been in worse crises than this. Many worse crises. The 1960s you just talked about. Go back and, there's some very interesting books you can read about 1968. Some of you may remember 1968. I was in England at the time. It was a bit more peaceful there. We just won the World Cup, so there was a lot of, the English were pretty happy about the state of things. But, go back 68. What a crisis this country was going through then. The 30s, the Great Depression, the crisis went through then. You mentioned obviously the 1850s and 1860s. That did end in civil war. But the period in the early days of the Republic, when the Republic faced all kinds of domestic and external challenges, America's come through all this. I do really have faith in the resilience, the creativity, the capabilities, and the basic decency of the American people to see through even. So that's the source of my optimism. And, you apologize if you've heard this before, but to illuminate that, I will quote one of my favorite think it's attributed to Winston Churchill, but other people have said it too, that Winston Churchill himself, of course, very, 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 very strong Americaphile. He loved this country. He had obviously family in this country, but he famously said, the great thing about America is America can always be relied upon to do the right thing, but only after it's exhausted every other alternative.
We'll end there. Thank you so much, Gerry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, there we go. Look, Notre Dame Dad. Scarlet. Oh, I can put it on. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's terrific. Thanks, man. Very good. Very good.
So
your questions are always, as I would expect from a professor, sharp. You have journalistic. Oh, you're very kind. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for coming. Go. Nice to see you again.
Enjoyed so much. I hope
Yeah, good. I have loved it. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Oh, thank you for coming. Thanks very much.
I interned at the Wall Street Journal back in the day on the marketing team. I was working on acquisitions.
Did you? Oh, right.
I presented to you once. I was in the intern final conference.
Oh, in New York. Oh, right. What were you doing?
I was on marketing. I worked for Sharon Ritter.
Oh, yeah. But you're here now? Are you at Notre Dame? Or, yeah.
I'm on the advisory council. I work at Bridgewater.
Oh, right. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, no, I was... funny, my daughter's dating a guy who's at Bridgewater, and I know Ray Dalio is quite a I wouldn't say a friend, because we've had a few sparring moments over the years over things like this, politics, but I do like him a lot. And of course, the other person I know very well, in fact, I just congratulated him on, I think he's won, is Dave McCormick, who was at Bridgewater. Were you there when Dave was there? I think no. How long have you been there? Okay, yes, yeah. No, Dave left about 5 years ago. Well, in fact, when he ran for, that's when he ran for Senate the first time he lost, so 3 years ago, but yeah. Oh, lovely to meet you. Nice to meet you, yeah.
I didn't know you were a Notre Dame fan. So
yes, this is my youngest, Scarlett, sophomore. This is,
Well,
lovely to meet you. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, hello. How do you do?
Hi,
how do you do?
I'm a junior here.
Nice to meet you.
Your column and editorial.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Every day.
That's very kind. Good to know.
The force for good that the Wall Street Journal.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you very much indeed, and good luck at Notre Dame. Did you say you're a junior? Yeah. What are you studying?
I study finance.
Oh, right, great. So you've got internships coming up. Is that?
At McKinsey.
Fantastic. Oh, where? In
Philadelphia.
Oh, great, brilliant. Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations. That's a great opportunity. Yeah, good. Well, nice. What's your name again? What's your name again? Cole. Good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and thanks for saying that.
It's not just my parents who are reading this stuff.
Good. I know. It's delightful. I know. We need more. We need your generation to subscribe. So please. So thank you for doing so.
I agree with a lot of what you said.
Well, that's kind. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm going to have you for one quick picture.
Yes, of course.
And then
Yeah.
come right back.
Yeah. Do you mind? I'll just quickly. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
5 girls.
Yeah. Too late now. They're all grown up. Nothing I can do.
Thank you so much.
No, it's a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Let me just put this
Whichever
picture.
way's easiest.
Okay, sorry.
The frame picture in here says family.
Oh, lovely.
Notre Dame photos.
Oh, lovely. What I'm going to probably do is leave it with Scarlett, because I'm flying to London tomorrow. So, yeah. No, Scarlett's and she can bring it back when she comes back. That's fine, yeah. Hey. Hi, how do you do? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Oh, thank you. Well, my, gratitude to you for what you're doing. Shall I get in the middle?
I need gratitude.
Oh, well, it's a wonderful. No, but it's a wonderful. And obviously, you had an amazing husband, Cheers.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a nice friendship.
Yes.
Friendship is
It's amazing. That's a great story about friendship, actually. Yeah.
Hey, Gerry, is your daughter still here?
She is. She's over there. She's there. Yeah.
She's in the blue?
She's in the blue, yeah. Thank you. Scarlett, come and say hi. Yes, she's maybe a little. She's literally like 2 hours ago had a wisdom tooth extracted.
I wanted to ask a number of questions.
This is Scarlett. This is Jay Jordan.
Where'd you rather go?
So again, went to Oberlin.
Oh,
A very, very different place. Yeah. I don't actually, but I've got. I can give you my email. All right, I'll get it from. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Can you speak? It must be very hard. You have gauze in it. Is it pain? Have you taken some Tylenol? Yeah. Is it still hurting?
You're released. Go back to your room.
Yeah. Go. So I'll see you later. You should. Go and rest. Go. All right, love you, darling.
Don't get her the wrong side.
Oh yeah, God no, that was a mistake, wasn't it? Yeah. I'll see. I'll text you later and see if you want to get dinner or something. But if you're not feeling up to it, I'll understand. I'll just let me know. Yeah. All right, darling. Thanks for coming. Oh, Chick-fil-A. Yeah, that's I like that. Yeah.
Everyone tells me that the best place still on campus is Roy's. And the more
We had dinner at Raw's last night, didn't we? Yeah, it was good. It was really good, actually. Yeah. No, it was good.
Mom and I used to go to Rocco's, which is still around.
Bye, darling. See you later. Thanks for coming. See you.
Rocco's.
be sure and tell Gretchen
I will.
and tell her I'm so sorry.
Oh, thanks, Lloyd. I enjoyed it. It was full of fun. Yeah, Matt's great. Good questions, and it's a good sort of rapport, so it works well. Yeah.
She didn't do it. Sport.
Thank you for your introduction. Thank you, Jay. Good to yeah. No, I'll see you. Lou's got my details, so it'd be lovely to. So if you're in New York, we can get lunch sometime. Something when you're. How often are you in New York? Well, you're mainly in the Hamptons, are you? When you're upstate, when you're up.
Well, I'm there, and I'm in New York. I'll be in New York next week.
Okay, well, it'd be great to. No, it'd be lovely to catch up.
Yeah.
And thank you very much. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Molly for you, right?
I will. I'll text her tonight. So I saw you. Yeah. We should get together. We should do another dinner with Lally. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we were lucky, but the timing was good. Yeah.
When I saw the date, and I thought 3 days after the election or 4 days, whatever it is, I thought this could be a disaster.
Well, Matt and I spoke last week and we were kind of proceeding on this, not the assumption, but on the high probability that we wouldn't even know the result at this stage yet, and that things could be kind of, very chaotic.
So it'd be great.
Yeah.
Get some,
Yeah.
controversy.
But what
Yeah.
you don't know is I'm serious with how much anger is in the audience.
It's what?
And how much anger is in the audience. I mean, I just think emotions have been so
Well, there may be.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
There's anger in the country.
Right.
Yeah.
Just deal with it.
But it's good it is good, and I do think, again, said for the first time since 2012, we do have an election where both sides have just immediately said, yeah, okay, it's done. And that is important because, that's sort of a healing process. Yeah.
It's clear.
And the fact that Biden's going to have him for lunch and all that kind of stuff, I think that's all good. It's, transition.
It's good to see a little bit of classiness somewhere.
Yeah. You don't see a lot of it from Trump. We were talking about that. Trump's ability to offend people is very high. Yeah.
There's Simon Joe Rogan's show after the election. Rogan was lecturing it. You've got an opportunity to create a legacy, but you've got to tone it down.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
You've got to not attack them. Be nice.
Right.
Be gentle.
But-
And don't
Trump
put
is sitting
people
there.
in jail. And,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No.
But he went.
He never even did it against Hillary, so he's not.
Yeah.
And Trump was sitting there nodding.
But you know the chances. I mean, the chances of him doing that. I mean, I remember when he was shot that first time. There was this week where it was he's going to be gentler and it's going to be more mellow. And then he wrote and then 3 days later, he gave his convention acceptance speech. And the speech, as written, was very much a unifying, healing speech. And then he went off. It was the old Trump. But there you go. At the convention, it was just 4 days after the shooting. Thank you very much.
He won the election. He didn't attack him.
No, he didn't know that yet. Thank you very much.